Okay. Does it sound, does it,
Yes,
As,
it does
as
say.
it's being recorded.
okay. Good morning to all those who are watching the recording and to all those who are here. I hope everyone's doing well as we continue, and we will finish our unit on Judaism and meditation and yoga, and then go on to our next unit on how do we look at the non-Jewish world. We'll get to that after we finish this last text. I just brought this last text. You notice that many of the texts that we saw pointed out that both transcendental meditation and yoga do have origins in other systems of belief and religion. But the question that we started with when we looked at transcendental meditation is that, yes, there are meditative techniques that once they are severed, you don't have a mantra that's the name of an idol or some other religion, and you don't have an idol in the front of the room. Even a traditional rabbi pointed out that A, it was okay, but B, you could, if you really want to have a
Close the door.
restful way of being in the world, you could try observing Shabbat. But okay, meditation does help. And then the same thing with yoga, we had sort of similar view. As a matter, one of the people who wrote the text that we looked at was a yoga teacher at a synagogue, and synagogues all over the country offer yoga, and they even have yoga services. So again, that question is, to what degree can we distinguish between the origin of a practice, and to what degree does that practice then become something that is not idolatrous, would normally be forbidden? So I just wanted to take this last one, which shows you a little bit more of a conflict in the author. This is from what's called the Jewish Journal, which is primarily from modern Orthodox uh, group. That says how a modern Orthodox Jew struggled to reconcile her yogic. Is that the way you say it? I haven't thought about that.
No.
Okay. Practice with her Judaism and so, do any of you recognize this name? Taffy Brodesser Ackner. She's a novelist. Fleischman is in Trouble, I think was the name of the book that became a TV series. Sima, I see the look of recognition. Yes.
I did watch that. There was like a three-part series
Yes.
on there.
About yes, a young Jewish man in Manhattan. Yes,
Mhm.
and she's written many other novels, and I did mention this before. And her most recent piece was an article in the New York Times magazine section about how she's seen a Broadway show, Operation Mincemeat, 13 times. I, however, have only seen it twice, so she's way ahead of me. Okay. Uh, this is from some years ago. She moved to Los Angeles, started doing yoga. Okay. I'd gone on antidepressants, uh, doing what I love the way she's an excellent writer, obviously, doing what the Romans do. That's an excellent way of looking at this, because if we think Romans, we're thinking, oh my God, the Romans, they talk about chief idolaters who, shall we say, whose reputation in Jewish life is very low, and turned to yoga. And it helped a lot, right? What about bowing, meditation, uh, ties to Judaism, to Hinduism and Buddhism? Is it a physiological practice, i.e., it's helping the body, or is it a spiritual one? I'm a modern Orthodox Jew. Am I practicing a religion outside my own? Am I sinning before God? Now, she's taking this very seriously, right? She points out that she married a man who converted. I like this line too. I find myself running an Orthodox home. You know the old joke, don't date a non-Jew unless you want to end up really religious, because sometimes it does happen that the non-Jewish partner becomes Jewish and becomes very religious. So here she says, there is a statue of Ganesh, the Hindu deity. Uh, Gee, I should have looked that up. I think that's the elephant, isn't it? Any experts on Hinduism out there? Okay. I think Ganesh is the elephant deity. By the way, I have been in Hindu temples, and anyone been in Hindu temple? Okay,
Yes. Yes.
okay. Uh,
Not yet. Not yet.
not yet. Okay. Well, when I was part of a group called Leadership Nashville, and we had a day for leaders in Nashville to talk about different religions, we always stopped at the Hindu temple in Nashville, which is a Hindu temple. That's exactly what it looks like. And inside you have statues. And your first reaction is, geez, these are all idols. Although I will say the people who run the temple always like to say, no, we're not worshiping idols. We're worshiping one God, and these are just manifestations of that God. They're not really idols. Okay, whatever. Anyway, at the end of the class, my instructor says, Namaste, and bows towards the class. And we bow back. I am bowing to the teacher, but what about the statue? Namaste means the divine in me salutes the divine in you. We are asked to put our hands in a prayer position, which sounds, joins hand. The more I thought about it, is yoga its own religion? Okay, and she points out that Judaism is, or is this just minutia? But minutia has a way in Judaism, how we do things. And so this is something I did not realize. The Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1977, Menachem, okay, losing what was his last name? Okay, Menachem Schneerson, forbade his followers from practicing yoga. Chabad in 1977 said no yoga. Inasmuch as these movements involve certain rites and rituals, they have been rightly regarded by rabbinic authorities as cults bordering on, and in some respects, actual avodah zarah, idolatry. Accordingly, remember, you may recall when we had that discussion about transcendental meditation, that was one of the main questions. Is it avodah zarah, or is it just a breathing technique? Accordingly, rabbinic authorities everywhere rule that these cults come under all the strictures associated with avodah zarah, so that also their prudences, and come under strict prohibition. So that would rule out yoga in any form for those within Chabad. So she asked her yoga teacher, who was a conservative Jew, what about that? And the teacher said, yoga is not a religion. It's a spiritual practice that combines the body, the mind, and the spirit. It is based on an ancient Indian tradition that includes inspiration from statues, which are a mythology that combine human and divine characteristics. Should it be allowed or prohibited? Based upon that definition, what do you think? Does that help, or does that hinder our understanding of yoga? And does it?
According to my thinking and my own personal view, is that yoga is more of a mind thing, relaxing breathing. It's not, I don't consider it a religious thing unless I do it religiously, in a sense, use that word religiously. But I think it's more to help with clearing my thoughts, my mind, and breathing better. Basically, that's how I look into as yoga for me, and doing the stretching
Right.
and
Fair. So in other words, that's the question. But notice how the yoga teacher defines it. She says it is a spiritual practice, and that there's a mythology. I have to say, you read that and it starts to question whether what this teacher is saying is starting to cross the line. So she asked someone else, David Edelson, a Reform rabbi, okay? And he said the following: if I'm in a church around Christmas time, I sing and even say Jesus in hymns. I know that I'm just singing because I like singing and in no way praying, so it doesn't worry me. Yoga feels just a bit dicier because I am a full participant in the experience, not an observer, right? You go into a yoga studio, you're not standing in the back and saying, "Oh, isn't that interesting what those people are doing?" Which I think we've all possibly done another religious. I once went to an Armenian church in Jerusalem, and I was fascinated by what they were doing. I was just watching. Okay, but I believe in general that to constitute avodah zarah, idolatry, here's his definition: you probably need some kavanah or intention. What are you thinking? What's your mind focusing on when you're doing this practice. So that would imply that if your mind is not focusing on the idolatrous nature, i.e., the idol, perhaps a mantra, perhaps something else that ties what you're doing to that idol or that religious system, based on his definition, it would seem to be okay, right? Now, notice he's using kavanah. Now, the author makes a very interesting point about kavanah, okay? Judaism is concerned not just with your actions, but your actions appear to others. In other words, not only what you do, but how does that look to others? All right. Bowing is the physical manifestation of idolatry. And it says in Leviticus, don't take idols, don't place a carved stone in your land, or bow down before it. So is it just what I'm intending? Or maybe when I bow down in a yoga class, I'm just thinking about, oh, that's stretching my muscles. That's my intention, stretch my muscles, not an intention to bow down to an idol. Okay. That intent, even so, don't I intentionally practice yoga? And, her teacher says it's okay, but she has a view of Judaism. I don't believe the practice of another religion makes me an adherent of that faith, but I do believe that I chose only to practice Judaism. The rituals and chanting that was expected of me in yoga seem like another religion. So she asked somebody else. She asked the senior teacher of yoga, who said the following: yoga is not a religion, but a science of religion. I'm not sure what that means. It applies to all religions. It's not that yoga comes from Hinduism. Hinduism originates in yoga. Buddhism comes from yoga too. He points out they're not incompatible. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, who some name we should be familiar with, used to come to our ashrams. He understand we were talking about the same thing. Hasidic mysticism and Kabbalah are very much in line with yogic thought, except the Lubavitcher Rebbe would obviously disagree with that. There is yoga in every religion. Yoga means union or absolute consciousness with God. That's the classic mystical. When we talk about we talk about any religion's mysticism. That is a good definition of mysticism. Okay. Some sects of yoga won't even use the word God. The tradition is similar to monotheism. To him, the statue of Ganesh at the front of many yoga studios is the same God to whom Jews pray. Now, again, having been in again, Jerry, you said you were in a Hindu temple?
Yeah, on one of our trips to Asia.
You saw the statue of the elephant?
Yes.
Did you think in your mind this is the same God to whom we are praying?
No.
No, I didn't feel that way either in Nashville when I was in there. So I don't know. So here's another view. An Orthodox rabbi, Pinchas Geller, who practices yoga at the same studio I do. Many Hindus argue these days that their deities are just archetypal principles. But any third grader in Hebrew school will tell you that those are idols. I mean, you walk in and you look at it, it's an idol. Veneration and offerings are unacceptable. I avoid classes where the teacher is too into the mythos. It is hard to escape the impression that you take some of the practices too seriously, then it would. So here's a guy who's saying some yoga classes are okay, but some of them cross the line. Okay. So she asked another one. She asked someone who's a chassid and a yoga teacher in, of all places, Brooklyn, New York. And she says, yoga is absolutely a religion. Is an Orthodox woman. Person lived on an ashram. She was certified to teach it. So what is the difference? No chanting, right? Some of you go to yoga classes, right? So some of you go to, some of you once gone to yoga classes.
I have, but only in a gym, and they're not going to do anything religious there. It's just a movement flow, and at the very end we say namaste. That's it. So it's very different. I haven't gone to an actual yoga studio or anything like that.
No chanting. No. No. Okay.
No.
She describes poses, but she won't use their traditional Sanskrit names. She won't say downward facing dog. I've always found to be, I'm sorry, it just sounds funny to me. Downward facing dog. Instead, I'll say, raise your hips to the ceiling. The Sanskrit names have a spiritual meaning. If you don't call these poses by their Sanskrit names, it's just exercise. So, Simmer, the class that you went
Well,
to, what do they talk? How do they talk about this?
actually, she did. It's so long ago because I've been doing it on my own since COVID, but she would use sometimes both the English version or the
Mhm.
actual Sanskrit names,
Mhm.
but not I don't remember.
Okay,
But
we're all
there
getting
are
older.
Sanskrit names, but if you're saying it in English, to me that's like meaningless as far as, religion.
Right. Well, so this is an Orthodox Jewish teacher of yoga who says, I just say them in English. Forget the Sanskrit names, forget the forget the statues, forget the chanting. So
But
what she
she's saying that she won't even say downward dog.
no, she says she won't use their Sanskrit names. She also will, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. She won't even say downward dog. Yeah, right. So
So you
in other
have to
words,
know what she's talking about when she says
right,
raise your hips to the ceiling because,
right. Well, I mean, that makes as much sense to me as downward facing dog. Someone who doesn't practice yoga, that doesn't make if she said, I want to show you what position number 3 is, and then she does something and says, okay, everybody do position number 3 with your hips.
just so you know, downward facing dog is actually an excellent position to do and use in any routine or just in general. It is just like a dog or a cat when they're kind of crouched down and they put their paws out in front of them and really give themselves a really good stretch. That's kind of what
Okay.
it is. Just
Okay,
so
now I
you
know.
so you guys can visualize what that means.
Okay. All right. But so what does she do? She doesn't even do that. I'm sorry. I misread that. So she doesn't even say that. No Sanskrit, no English translation of the Sanskrit. She just does something else. Okay. So in other words, again, what is the issue? The issue is to uh, distance oneself from even, anything that might possibly be related to religion. It's almost like, in Judaism, we have a principle, something called muksa. Not only are you not allowed to, say, cut with the scissors, you're not allowed to touch a scissor, right? Because we want to keep far away from something that we shouldn't be doing. So you don't even touch it. So even though the prohibition is cutting with it. Okay, so it sounds similar to that. Okay. And it's true. He says at least half the people in my yoga studio as well as its teachers are Jewish. There's a remember the congregation whose daughter had a yoga studio. I don't think she has it anymore. And yeah, yes, there are a lot of Jews. There's a book called The Jew and the Lotus. Okay, so here's her conclusion. Uh, the question of yoga's compatibility with Judaism may be unanswerable. In the Reform world, it's the Jews' intention, but the Judaism has attention, wishes are not the only thing. In other words, if Judaism is concerned with what we eat, as we saw in last week's Torah portion, what to wear and wash my hands before, eating, the problem isn't what yoga might ask me to think or believe, it's what it asks me to do. Okay, so is then bowing down in a place where there's an idol forbidden? Further practice of Judaism has not historically helped me become more open-minded, but perhaps that is where yoga can be an asset, not a detriment. Yoga walks the fine line. I think that's a very good definition there. Verboten to some, certainly not to all. And we saw some of the people who were speaking about it. But maybe my upright approach to religion makes yoga and its nuances of illicit practice to help me remain flexible in my spirit as well as my body. Maybe having something that isn't so easy to reconcile, a gray area, is good for me. Okay, I think we can. I like the way she says that. And I think she by quoting those different sources, we see the way that different people look at it and what lines are made to distinguish yoga from a religious or spiritual practice. Okay. How?
Rabbi,
Yes.
I have a question. If I have elephant statues in my house, is that sacrilegious? Is that idolatry? I'm serious. I
Okay.
just
How
thought
often
about.
do you bow down to them?
Oh, I don't. I don't. They're with the trunks up, and that means good luck. My mother-in-law taught me
Okay.
that. She's the one who started me on it.
Are they Ganesha or are they just some elephant statue?
There's just some elephant with their trunk
Right.
up in the
You,
air.
you, you believe me, if it was Ganesha, you would if you saw an elephant statue and it was Ganesha, you wouldn't put it in your house. I suspect.
No.
It's Ganesha is pretty obvious what it is. You can Google that after class and you'll say to yourself, oh yeah,
Okay.
that has nothing to do. My wife also likes how we have a bunch of little elephant statues.
Okay.
Many
Now I
people,
feel okay.
I've been to other people's houses and I understand that's a thing with some people. It's not.
It means good luck with the trunk up in the air. That's what it means.
Okay, there's one we saw right outside a church in Rome when we were there last year. There's a famous one. Okay, so let's stop that. And we're going to now go on to our new topic, and that is the topic of Jews and non-Jews. There is a chapter in Rabbi Barmash's book about this. Now, clearly, when you're talking about the relationship between Jews and non-Jews, that has, as we will see when we look at the text, significantly changed from different places to where we are now. In certain countries where some of our ancestors lived, the assumption, which was fairly safe, was that a good majority of the non-Jews were anti-Semitic, right? And hostile to Jews. That was true in many places, some places less so. There's the issue which we'll look at one after we take this general question of how we look at non-Jews. What about the non-Jews who are married to Jews in our congregation? What can they do? What can they do or can't do during services? Take a closer look at that. That is a hotly debated issue, I should tell you, within the conservative movement. Well, it's an issue in the conservative movement because in the reform movement, there, as you know, there's no sense that we're going to have to follow tradition as opposed to orthodoxy, which would, but even in, we'll see, actually, we're going to see even in orthodoxy, some questions have been raised. And then the third, so that will be the general rule, look at what's going on in the synagogues, intermarriage. And then some of you may be aware, there was a recent law passed in Israel about the death penalty for Palestinians who are terrorists and murdered Jews, and that's brought up some issues as well. So we'll take a look at all of those. Okay, comments or questions before we begin? Okay. The first text we're going to look at is written by a conservative rabbi. It's called "The Status of Non-Jews in Jewish Law and Law." Okay, and this is just a series of questions which I put up on the screen, which I'll have in front of me. I suppose Ed is. I don't suppose there's a way to share two texts at the same time, is there, Ed? Oh, he's not there. Okay, I don't think there is. So I'm just going to show this to begin with, and some things that we can keep in mind, and I'll have in front of me as we look at this first text about how we look at non-Jews. And Rabbi Hammer wrote a teshuvah. We'll see as we read the teshuvah why it came up at that particular time. He's actually talking about a very specific issue that arose. Why does he say? And he made Aliyah. He lives in Israel, right? What is it different in Israel than here? And look at some biblical examples, classical rabbinic attitudes. Historically, we're moving closer to the front, to the present. Medieval, early modern thought, the rules from the medieval, whether Christians and Muslims are monotheists, right? The Bible was not dealing with surrounding culture in which you had people who were monotheists. The Bible is dealing with a culture where everyone else was idolatrous, idol worships, right? So that's it. What does that mean? What does it mean when you live in a country, as we do in the United States, when the majority of the people we're living against are monotheistic? Does that change how we think about Jews and non-Jews? And then we'll see his conclusions. Okay, so let's start and go to Rabbi Hammer's article. Tammy, welcome. Siona, welcome. Jack, good to see you all there. We're just starting our new unit on Jews and non-Jews, and we're going to use the text that we had in that Rabbi. Let me just do a little adjustment on my screen here. I need to do some things. Okay. Oh, Judith, good morning. How are you doing? Good to see you. Okay. So we're going to take this. Okay. This is from Rabbi Barmash's book, and those of you who received the text, I sent this out last night. Okay, so here it is, Ruvain Hammer. Now, it's from the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly, the conservative movement. Okay, and Rabbi Hammer, prolific scholar, great leader of the conservative movement. He had a PhD. He was an Air Force chaplain. He made Aliyah. He was instrumental in founding the institutions of conservative Judaism in Israel, the Schechter Institute. He served on the Vad HaHalachah, the Committee on Jewish Law for the conservative movement, Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. In other words, very well known, very well respected scholar. So he's going to ask this question. What is the status of Gentiles in Jewish law today? How should we deal with statements in traditional Jewish literature that are negative or discriminatory regarding non-Jews? And we will find them. I will say that some of you may know that in Hebrew, in biblical Hebrew, if you say the word goyim, you're talking about nations. Okay, lo yisagoy el goy cherev lo yilmadu od milchama. Right, nation, lo yilmadu, lo yisagoy el goy. It's nation. In later Jewish life, the word goyim in Yiddish went from being nation in Hebrew to being a term for not only non-Jews, but a very derogatory one, right? Which I don't use to refer to non-Jews, and I'm happy to say that that type of usage, I think, has fairly much disappeared in Jewish life, okay? Because it is the essence of seeing the non-Jewish world in a very negative sense. Okay, so he's aware of this. You know, the Jewish tradition. You know, go back to the Bible. What does it say? What does it say about the non-Jews? In some parts of the Bible, it says wipe them out, tear down their idols. You know, destroy their places of worship. It's a whole different world than the one that we're living in. So, what is the status of Gentiles in Jewish law today? How do we deal with them? Okay. He points out there are negative, positive, and negative appeals. Okay. And by the way, also note, he even in his question itself is going to make that assumption that we're going to see traditional Jewish literature negative or discriminatory terms about non-Jews. It's all over the Bible. It's really easy to find. So what do we do about those today? I mean, there aren't any we don't have any Canaanites, Hittites nowadays. Does that mean that the terminology and the way of relating to the Midianites should be the way that we relate to non-Jews today, right? Okay. So he is aware of that and wants to see if those are ones that we want to continue. Okay. So he's also concerned, and this gee, do I have the year? I don't have the no, there's not the year on this, but this is another important point. He emphasizes the importance of acknowledging and intentionally discerning which aspects of the tradition to accept and which to disregard. Already you can see that he's talking in a modern perspective. We're not going to blindly accept everything from the past as absolutely true, especially when modern extremists advocating for very negative beliefs about non-Jews also support attacking and killing them ab initio. In other words, right, that's what you just can do. He's writing this years ago. Why does it resonate today? Anyone? Anyone feel any special
Because
need?
of all the anti-Semitism out there right now.
Well, there is certainly a great deal of anti-Semitism, but what he's trying to talk about, what about negative beliefs held within the Jewish community about non-Jews in general? supporting attacking and killing non-Jews.
We don't believe in that
Okay, so why does it resonate particularly nowadays?
because the animosity brought by some of the Muslim communities.
Well, I would also argue something that is very disturbing is that many of some, be very careful, some of the extremist settlers on the West Bank in Israel have said and done things that are really very disturbing, attacking Arabs and non-Jews, and they sometimes base themselves, we'll see this, on views that they find in parts of our tradition. I don't know how many of you have been following what's going on the West Bank over the last, well, actually several years, but it's gotten worse over the last few months, where viewpoints about non-Jews have been used to justify attacks on very peaceful Arabs who are living in the West Bank. But we'll get to that. Okay. So where are we? So this is her introduction, and now she's going to go to the actual teshuvah itself. It says the Torah and rabbinic literature teach the equality of all human beings, right? Demut, the image of God, and the Bible itself doesn't say that God only created Jews, right? Now, by the way, let me also point out an interesting factor, which we saw a couple of years ago in the stories of the Bible when they talk about the divisions among peoples. Peoples are divided usually by national origin groups. The Bible, when it talks about the divisions of peoples in the world, never talks about people's divisions and implications based on skin color, right? That is not in the Bible. Okay. Nevertheless, it cannot be denied that there are passages in rabbinic literature, Kabbalah, mysticism, and medieval philosophy, works that depict Gentiles in negative terms. So what do you do with it? Okay. If you teach our tradition, what do you do with those? Unfortunately, in Israel, an extremely serious situation has arisen in recent times because the publication of radical books lauded by a small number of well-known extremist rabbis in which non-Jews are depicted as being of a lesser species than Jews, and in which slaying Arabs, including young children, is deemed permissible and even commanded. This is very disturbing. I hope, and we cannot deny that there are extremist Jews who are teaching this. Now, he wrote this some years ago, and it's gotten worse. The so-called halakhic position of these rabbis have influenced fanatical groups of extremists and have led to acts of destruction, injury, and death.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
you mentioned what's going on in Judea and Samaria before, and it is very disheartening and it's really disgusting, actually. And Israel closes their eyes to it. They just let it happen. That's the saddest part.
Well, the sad part is that, as I think we know, the coalition politics in the Knesset, that Bibi Netanyahu depends upon being prime minister because he has the support of a small number of very radical right-wing people in the cabinet. And again, remember, the Israeli government is a parliamentary system that was based upon European models, i.e., there are 120 seats in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, and when you vote for the Israeli parliament, you have it's not a long list. You have one choice. You vote for a party. It would be like if you go into a poll booth in the United States and your only choice is Republican or Democrat. That's it. Goodbye. Make your choice.
So they close their eye to it for that purpose, though, to keep their support, the support of those radicals.
Oh yeah, very clearly, right? In other words, in order to become prime minister, you need 61 seats in the Knesset, a majority. And the seats in the Knesset are apportioned by the percentage of votes you get. If 60% of the people vote for party A, 60% of the people vote for party A, I'm sorry, if 50% of the people vote for party A, you get 60 seats, right? And never in the history of the state of Israel has one party received anywhere near 50%. So Israeli governments are always, always coalitions. One of the reasons the Orthodox parties, there are parties based upon Orthodoxy, have so much power, is they traditionally say to the guys who get a lot of votes, okay, we'll go with you. We don't care about your foreign policy. We don't care about this, but just give us money for your yeshivas and we won't go into the army. And you do that, we'll go with you and you can be the prime minister. And that is the history in brief, right, Sema?
Right. If they get what they want, that's all they care about, right?
That's correct.
But still, I'm sorry, our religion, I know there's some radical rabbis out there now and they profess this stuff, but it's just wrong what the Jewish settlers are doing.
Absolutely. And by the way, this is what Ruvain Heimer
I
is
don't
talking
mind the
about here.
settlements. I don't
No.
mind the settlement. It's what they're doing to their Arab neighbors and their farms and their animals and their crops and things like that.
Yeah, it's terrible PR for the state of Israel. It's not bad enough that people don't like Israel altogether. So let's put on an American reporter driving through the West Bank, and all of a sudden a gang of young people with sticks and stones start chasing him, and he has to get in his car and drive away, right? Because he's worried that these young people have been taught by their rabbis that, oh, those are non-Jews. We need to get rid of them. We justifiably they're inferior beings, and we can attack them. And there are certain ministers of the Israeli government who are members of parliament of extreme right wing, and Netanyahu is dependent upon their support to have a majority of votes in the Knesset to stay prime minister. So that is how it is.
The thing is, if they actually lived in peace with them, it would be set as such a phenomenal example, not just to show the whole world that Arabs and Jews can live together, and instead the Jews are the ones causing the problems in the West Bank.
Right.
So,
and as we know, in many parts of Israel, that's exactly, many parts of Israel, that's what happens. Haifa is a good example, right? Haifa, everyone points to Haifa as a peaceful place in general between Jews and non-Jews. So Rabbi Hammer, who was writing this, again, this is not last week he's writing this. This has been going on for several years, right? Yes, for the first time in thousands of years, a Jewish state governs the lives of non-Jews. Jews constitute the majority and must deal with the status of the non-Jewish minority, right? And we understand the relationship between religion and a state of Israel is not going to be the exact same thing as the relationship between religion and state in the United States. Israel is a Jewish state, we accept that. So there are going to be different ways in which religion plays itself out in its society, unlike in America, okay? Even though halakhically, halakha, Jewish law, is not the civil law of Israel, it is influential, right? Therefore, certain things in Israel don't happen on Shabbat. Many things are closed, right? And Israelis accept that's the way it is. It's not like closing the malls in Bergen County on Sunday, right? Which is still to this day a controversial issue. There's no controversy in Israel that things are closed on Saturday, on Shabbat. Yeah, the non-religious Israelis might, go to the beach, and they do, but there's no great sense, oh, we need to go to the mall, right? As opposed to here. Okay. What was once a theoretical problem, right? What's our conceptual view of the world of the non-Jew, or merely a matter of embarrassment? Living in the modern world, we don't like the idea that there are some texts that see non-Jews as inferior, has become a practical matter of great importance. And I would say that's even more so than when he wrote this. It will be necessary to deal honestly with these sources. So Rabbi Hammer says, look, let's take a look at what they're talking about. This is not coming from nowhere, right? Let's take an honest look at it. To admit that different attitudes existed over the course of the development of Judaism, and to candidly criticize and reject certain parts of the tradition while embracing others as representing the true core of Jewish belief. Okay, there are certain, and I mean this is not a radical idea. This is an idea that the conservative movement has done for many years. Our movement is uniquely qualified to understand that both laws and concepts change in accord with differing times and conditions, rather than saying this is the law from the beginning and it's always been that way and we can't change it. We understand that historical factors have had an influence about the way the tradition has developed. Excuse me. It is our responsibility to define what is appropriate for us in our own time, basing it upon those teachings within the tradition that represent the highest ideals of Judaism. So you see, what is his criteria going to be? His criteria is going to be, oh, let's look at the past and let's understand historically why those rules were there. And we can say that those rules were there because of historical necessities, which no longer exist today. And we have a higher view of the ideals of Judaism, and they are inconsistent with some of these views from the past. And therefore, we need to be sure that those views from the past are clearly refuted. Okay? Yeah, any comments or questions so far? Okay. So what is he going to do? All right. We see, by the way, the fact that he's going to emphasize the positives and the negatives, he doesn't want to say, let's just look at the positives and leave it. He wants to convince people. He wants to say, look, I'm going to give an honest view of the past. And there's stuff that's not going to be good and we're not going to like. But we can't deny that it's there, even if we deny that it is applicable today. But he wants to be sure that because sometimes people, and you sometimes see this, let's just ignore that. We just look at the positive stuff. It's a question we've seen before. When you look at the past, are you able to look at the past and recognize that there are negatives there? Or do you just erase the negatives in your past? It's a debate we're having as we reach 250 years of American democracy. So he's saying, no, let's not do that. Let's not erase it. Let's honestly confront it. Okay. So he's going to do this historically. Let's start with the Bible. Right? That's our earliest text. And that's the text that is the basis for what comes later. Okay. Well, what do we have in the Bible? We know, by the way, that the story of the Jewish people doesn't begin until Abraham. Right? The beginning of the Bible is about all humanity, right? All human beings are created in the image of God. Adam and Eve are not Jewish. Noah is not Jewish, right? They're before Abraham. Righteous non-Jews merit praise, right? We have Shiphrah and Puah. Remember the two Egyptian handmaidens who refused to kill the Egyptian babies. Pharaoh's daughter, right? Who takes Moses out of the river. We just celebrated Passover, right? And sinful human beings, whether Israelite or not, draw criticism. There are some really bad Israelite kings. If you go through the Bible, they did some really horrible things, right? And they're there. The Bible does not discuss, not to mention, let's face it, the story of the Exodus. They didn't want to go. They constantly complained to Moses. Right, as I think I've quoted one of my teachers saying, Moses didn't lead the people out of Egypt. He dragged them out of Egypt to the promised land because they're constantly rebelling. The law about fighting the Canaanites applied only to the period of the Israelite conquest of the land of Israel and cannot be used to justify attacks on non-Jews today, right? Joshua leads the Israelites into the land of Canaan, and yes, the land is conquered. And yes, many Canaanites are wiped out and their cities are wiped out. But what Rabbi Hammer is going to say, okay, let's not say, therefore, today we need to wipe out all the non-Jews who live in the land of Israel. Okay. So now we're going to go directly. That was Rabbi Barmash's introduction. So now let's take a look directly on some of these biblical texts. We don't have time for that today. Okay. The Torah's attitude to non-Israelites is overwhelmingly positive, right? All human beings are created in divine image, right? Humans created in the image of God. Humans, the pinnacle of creation, right? If we think of the days of creation, the humans are created after the animal, all the other animals, right? No differentiation is made among groups of human beings. Yeah, this is not like as I just said before. Since there's basically equality among all humans, it is not surprising that non-Israelites are depicted in biblical books as moral and God-fearing, right? Noah, he points out, Job, he's blameless in righteousness. What about the book of Jonah? Remember the sailors on the boat? Jonah's on a boat, and the boat is being lashed by the waves, and the sailors are saying, "What's going on here? Who's causing this?" And Jonah says, "Yeah, I guess I'm not doing what God wants me to do because I ran away from His command. So it's my fault." And the sailors come out, and also in the book of Jonah, you may recall as well, Jonah gets to Nineveh and says, "What is it? I don't want to quote it incorrectly." He says, "Oh, I think it's Od Arba Im Yamim the Nineveh Nehepachet." In other words, 40 days Nineveh is gonna be destroyed because of all the bad things you're doing. So the king and everybody else, they repent. They're the ones who said, "Gee, Yonah," they listened to a Jewish prophet in ways that many of the Israelites don't do. They just say, "Oh, you're right. We got to stop doing the bad things." Okay. So, how are Israelites different from others? At Mount Sinai, they took upon themselves the task of being God's holy people, right? Devoted to God's ways. Israelite is not superior to other nations, nor is to rule over them. Whatever one might think about the concept of the chosen people, that's been defined in many ways, and perhaps we should have some classes on that at some point. It does not imply racial superiority of the Israelites. All human beings are judged on the basis of their deeds and held responsible for their breaches of morality. Idolatry is a sin for Israel alone. Oh, if the non-Jews are idolaters, well, they're idolaters, But if we turn to be idolaters, that's a real serious sin for ourselves. I know there's some debate about what is chosen people, and certain groups of Jews don't like to talk about it because they think it implies superiority. That's why the Reconstructionists, when they come to the Torah and Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, they don't say that God chose us from other people because they think chosenness means superiority, but clearly it does not. But okay. In prophetic literature, the doctrine is taught that the time will come when all nations will learn what Israel knows and teaches about God, while not becoming Israelites, all worship the one God and thus become God's people as well. Some of the Haftorot we read during Pesach talk about that. In the future day, everyone will recognize God. Okay, what about the Canaanites? They shall not dwell in your land. They should be destroyed, lest they cause you to sin against me. The biblical verse is not a general command concerning either killing or robbing of all enemies, but referred specifically to the Canaanites and the Israelites fought against them to attain possession of the land of Canaan. These and similar laws refer only to the Canaanites. Okay, that should be clear. We're only talking about Canaan, and there aren't any Canaanites left. By the way, how successfully did the Jews in the books of the Bible get rid of all the Canaanites? Not terribly well, because the prophets are constantly complaining. You're following all in one point the Bible says wipe out the Canaanites, and maybe certain parts there were, but clearly throughout the ancient land of Israel, there were still idolaters around. The laws concerning the Canaanites were restricted to them alone at that particular time and could never be used as a reason to similarly eliminate any group today. I mean, that's his conclusion. Any comment or question about that? No? Okay, because if you say that all of the non-Jews who live in the land of Israel, by the way, that would include not only the Arabs, but of course all the Christians, the Druze, and all those others who live there. So the ones that Rabbi Hammer is talking against use this idea, it's in the Bible, wiping out the Canaanites. but he says it only applies to the Canaanites, and you can't use that today. Okay, that is going to be his main conclusion that he's going to use to say that these groups that are teaching otherwise are not teaching what Judaism is about. Okay, we just start this. I have a few minutes. What about rabbinic? Let's move historically, right? After the end of the Bible, we're talking about the rabbinic period. Okay. Highlighting rabbinic texts that alternately express positive and negative attitude towards non-Jews, Rabbi Hammer argues that the negative attitudes stem from Jewish historic oppression under Greek and Roman foreign rule. Today, Jews need to decide which beliefs to encourage and which to oppose. When you live amongst a governing authority that is hostile to you, gee, surprise, we find within our tradition negative statements about them, right? One could say that was true in parts of Eastern Europe. There were negative statements about whole groups of Eastern European non-Jews based upon the fact that, yeah, they were quite hostile in many places. Okay. Based upon the creation of Adam, the sages taught only one human being was created in the world in order to create harmony among human beings so that one cannot say to the other, my father is greater than your father. Again, he's emphasizing the universalism. Only one human being was created in order to teach that if one destroys one person, it is accounted to him as if he had destroyed an entire world. And if one sustains one life, it is accounted to him as if he sustained an entire world. What is missing from those statements? Those statements do not say if one destroyed one Jew, and it does not say if one sustains one Jew, right? These are very universalistic statements within the Talmud. There are numerous rabbinic sayings as well as halakhic decisions advocating fair and just treatment of non-Jews. Okay, those are the positive ones. But Rabbi Hammer is going to say, look, I got to be honest. There are negative ones. There are laws in the Mishnah and Talmud, as well in the medieval codes, that differentiate between Jews and Gentiles and single out non-Jews for special negative treatment. Some of these laws simply delineate what parts of Jewish religious practice are restricted to Jews alone. Yet there are also laws that are discriminatory and contradict our concepts of justice and fairness, therefore presenting us with a serious dilemma. Many negative statements reflect the intense suffering of Jews under the foreign Greek and Roman foreign rule. It is obvious that rabbinic literature is a vast collection of writings gathered from hundreds of years. From the rabbinic period starts, several hundred years before the beginning of the Common Era, and extends for about 500 years into it's about a 1,000-year period. Teachings by myriads of sages. By its very nature, then, it includes a variety of opinions on all subjects. There's no page of the Talmud practically that does not have a difference of opinion. Now, there may be a difference of opinion about how to practice a certain Jewish ritual, but they also may be about these other issues. Honesty demands that we confront all of these opinions and make a decision as to which represent the beliefs we wish to encourage and which we oppose. By the way, so let's stop for a second. He is saying we confront all of these, make a decision to which represent the beliefs we wish to encourage and those we wish to oppose. How do we know which ones we should encourage and how do we know which ones we should oppose? How do we know that we're doing it with integrity? How do you think Rabbi Hammer is going to think about it? Sima?
I don't know, but if we just follow do unto others as you'd have others do unto you, I think we all are good.
Okay, or the Hillel version, which is what is hateful to you, don't do to your fellow, right? That's there.
Right.
That sort of principle actually appears in many religions, right? Yeah. Okay. So in other words, are there underlying principles that we feel, exactly as Sima has said, which are the essential Jewish teachings? And if we apply what we see as the essential Jewish teachings to these texts, we will see that some of them are coherent and congruent with what we think believe are the ultimate Jewish values, and some of them are abhorrent and are against those common Jewish. So he has set out those common Jewish values. All people are created equal. Every life is of infinite worth. And he sees very clearly a dominant view in the tradition that emphasized the common humanity of all people. So he's going to say, as he's already said, but he'll say that more specifically, those are the dominant ones, right? Which ones represent the beliefs we wish to encourage? Those beliefs, and the ones we wish to oppose, kill all the Canaanites. We're opposing that, and we have reason for opposing it both as both theologically and historically, to applying that to today. Okay, well, that's about as far as we're going to get today. Comments, questions?
So how do we stop Hamas, Hezbollah, and Iran from murdering Jews?
Okay, that is a separate and of course, that is a critical question, right? I would argue killing and attacking random Arabs who live, outside of, adjacent to the ceasefire lines, shall we say, does not accomplish that goal. If you want to stop Hamas and Hezbollah, don't go around, confiscating the sheep of your Arab neighbor. That is not going to stop. You think, oh, we're going to show them how tough we are, and we're going to take their stuff, and that's going to make Hamas and Hezbollah stop. You are crazy. As a matter of fact, if anything, not only it won't stop Hamas and Hezbollah, and it will reduce the amount of support that Israel has within the entire world, and that is, to me, that's also a very great danger. You need allies if you're going to stop Hamas and Hezbollah. And doing things that make you an isolated nation, which is what some people are trying to do, is going to encourage Hamas and Hezbollah.
But even trying to stop them in Iran itself is alienating Israel and Jews.
Yeah, I'm not right. You are correct that this is a very complex matter. And when we're talking about both the use of diplomatic and military force and how they relate and how one uses them, there are good people who disagree on that. And I'm, beyond the nature of this course, that'd be another interesting course. We can talk about the history of the diplomacy and military force in the history of the state of Israel. That's a whole other issue. But you're right that let's just say that we're all hoping that one way or the other, the security of Israel is assured, right? That's all. That's what we want to see. Okay, any other comments or questions? All right, so we will pick this up. Oh, let me also make one other point. I will be away in May, so that we will be meeting next week, which is the 21st. We will be meeting on the 28th. That's 2 more classes. And then we will take a little break. We will not meet on May 5th or May 12th. And then we'll resume on May 19th. Okay, so we will not be meeting the first 2 weeks of May.
And then I'm gone the next 2 weeks. So I'll see you in June.
Okay, taking a trip?
Northwest, a American Cruise Line of the Northwest, the Lewis Clark Trail on the Snake and Columbia Rivers, and visiting our son in Seattle.
All right. So give my regards to Adam.
Will do.
Okay. Everyone, have a good day. Enjoy the beautiful weather. We'll see you next week.
You too. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi. Bye.